Okay, so this is the second video in our little revision course, and in this video we're going to look at the develop module, and specifically we're going to look at what's called the basic panel in the develop module. So as you can see at the moment, I'm in the library because the library word is highlighted here. So if I click over on develop, I'm now in the develop module. And when we go into the develop module, our menus on both sides again change. On this side, we've got presets. Basically, that's all we have is presets. This here is called the navigation or the navigator. And over this side here are all the things that we can do to the picture. So the basic panel is really just the first part of it up to here. But we're going to do a little bit more than the basic panel, just a little bit, but we're not going to go into the details of some of the other panels. So the first thing I suggest people do is that they look for the profile that is in their camera. So at the moment, the profile for this picture is Adobe Color, and that's perfectly okay. But if you want to give yourself a little bit of an edge, you can change that by clicking at the little arrow there at the side of Adobe Color. Go down to the word Browse, and when you go down to Browse, you may have to pick camera matching. There it is, camera matching. And in camera matching, I'm using a Fuji camera, and so I'm going to use the Fuji Velvia Vivid. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to use the Provia Standard, which is just a type of film that Fuji made. So that's now the profile that I've decided to use. There'll be a slight difference in how the photograph looks, but as it's the look that the camera manufacturer has decided on rather than Lightroom, it often gives us a little bit of an advantage. So having done that, the other thing I would suggest you do before you make any other changes is if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, down to lens corrections. And in lens corrections, so when you see it, it'll be closed like that. You'll have to open it. So lens corrections, you want to go for the profile. Make sure it's in profile, okay? And tick this remove chromatic aberration and tick the profile corrections. Now, for my particular camera, ticking this doesn't make any difference because Fuji has already put the corrections into Lightroom. But if you're using a Nikon or a Canon camera, you might see the picture change shape ever so slightly. And what it's doing is it's correcting for the inherent faults that there are in all different lenses. Okay, so you would tick those. Now we're going to go back up and look at the picture. Now this picture, if we look at the histogram, remember this side is black and this side is white. We have a full range in here. So we can literally say the exposure is fine. We don't need to increase or decrease the exposure. If we wanted to, we do it here. This is taking it back and this is taking it forward. As we can see, we don't need to do either. The next one underneath is contrast. Oh, I beg your pardon. Before we do that even, this is the color up here. So I have it as shot. So my camera, I think, is set at cloudy. And but you have the option of going through. So this is auto. This is daylight. This is cloudy. See, you might notice it's a bit yellow. Shade is even more yellow. And tungsten, obviously, we're not going to use. It's going blue. That's what you'd expect. Fluorescent, I'd expect it to go greenish. Flash is similar to daylight. And custom simply means you're going to change it yourself. So you can change the colors here. Personally, I find that very difficult to do. What you can do is if you click on this eyedropper and move it into the picture and you find somewhere in the picture that should be grey, so let's go in here, that should probably be grey, and click it, then you get a new color balance. Now that color balance doesn't look great. The blue is coming through here. You can see it's picked a color balance of 3900. We know it was daylight, so let's take it up to 5.5. Or actually, let's go back to automatic, because for this picture, automatic works quite well. Okay, so that's the color. Underneath the color then, we have the exposure. We've already talked about that. Underneath that, we have contrast. Now, I usually leave that alone. I'll show you why, because this is how I do contrast. I take the highlights. I will always take them back, so I reduce the highlights. And if you watch the histogram, you will notice that this part of the histogram up here is reducing. Okay, and then we go down to the shadows and we go the opposite direction. Now we could go a lot or we could go just a little. Personally, I find that if you're going around 25 each way, you're probably going to be about right. Then we press Alt on our keyboard, click on our mouse and move the whites to the right. And we keep doing it until we see something appear on the screen. Once we see it, we just go back again. So I've gone plus 15 on the whites. And then I do the same with the blacks. I press Alt, click, and go the other direction. Now, we already have a little bit of black. You can see it up here in this part, but it's no harm to have a little bit more black. You don't want any more white than a little touch of it. A little bit more black is actually adding contrast to the picture. That's it. Now, I should have pressed done. After I did the color up here, I should have pressed done, so sorry about that. If we look here, we can see the difference between the two pictures. Now, I think you'd agree that the color in this picture is actually better, and this was automatic in Lightroom, and this is kind of a little bit yellower. So I think this has actually done a better job with the color. And apart from that, there isn't a huge difference. There is an increase in contrast, certainly, but there isn't a huge difference in this particular case. Go back over here again. So that's the top part of the basic panel, and the next bit is what we call the presence, which is still part of the basic panel, really. And so with presence, with texture, there's a lot of texture in this, so I'd give it a little bit extra texture. Watch what clarity does. Clarity makes everything stark. It increases the contrast in the midtones. Now, I hope you'd agree that that's very harsh. So I've pushed it up to 97 there. It's very harsh. It certainly doesn't need that, and I'm just going to leave it around 20. Similarly with dehaze, let's push it all the way up and see what happens. Okay, so dehaze is really useful where you've got literally haze in a picture. We don't have any here, this is a clear day, but you can see what it's doing. It's making everything dark and horrible. And for this picture, we might not use it, but generally speaking, I find if you give even 10 of haze, you're going to help your picture. Underneath that, then we have vibrance. So let's see what vibrance does. We move it all the way over and all the colors become accentuated. Overly so much so that we get blue here in the cat, for example. Okay, but the thing is, it does help a little bit to give a little bit. So I'm just going to give it 8 or 9. These numbers are not magic. You have to work these numbers out yourself. Generally speaking, keep the numbers low, and once you see a change beginning to happen on your picture, you've probably gone far enough. The last one then is saturation, and my advice is never touch saturation. I'll just move it up here. Saturation changes all of the colors in the picture, makes them all accentuate very quickly. And to be honest with you, I think it's harder to get right. So I just usually give my pictures a little bit of vibrance and I leave saturation alone. So that's a quick revision of the basic panel, as well as the selecting a profile, and don't forget also the lens corrections. You should always have those switched on.